Welcome to the Pack the House Show, where we have conversations about sharing your faith as you walk through life with others.
Hello, welcome back to Pack the House. Excited to be here with you. I am Pastor Jason. I don't have our normal co-hosts with us today. Andrew and Aaron are both out today, but that gives us the exciting opportunity to talk with Becca Klim. Becca is our children's ministry coordinator at our Carmel site. She's relatively new to being on staff at Cornerstone, but not at all new to Cornerstone. So, Becca, anything you want to tell us about yourself before we get started?
So I, like Pastor Jason said, I'm the children's ministry coordinator specifically for our Carmel site. But this was actually the church that I grew up in. So I went through our children's ministry and youth ministry here at Cornerstone before going off to college. And so it is such a blessing to be able to be back. And as I like to share, get to teach Jesus in the place that taught me about Jesus.
Really well said. And what is it that attracted you to children's ministry?
So originally when I decided I wanted to go into ministry, I was dead set on youth ministry. And I think that was just because that had been my most recent experience as a high schooler. And so in one of our classes at Concordia Chicago, we had the opportunity to teach in our early childhood center there. So go down with our classmates and lead a Bible story time and an activity. And it was in one of those teaching opportunities that I really realized that this children's ministry was where my gifts were and where I felt that God could best use me in ministry. And I've been with it ever since. That's
awesome. So I'm really excited, Becca, to have you here because you have experience and expertise that I don't. So I want to take advantage of this opportunity and have a conversation this morning about as I shared with you in preparing for this, we spend a lot of time in this podcast talking about faith conversations with adults. But I want to spend some time today talking with you specifically about both faith conversations and faith sharing as it relates to children. So we'll start with this one. So many of the people, maybe who listen to the podcast, but we know so many others in our congregation and beyond who have especially grandchildren who they really want to have a relationship with Jesus, and they might be the primary faith sharer for that child. So you do a really great job of this, of bringing sometimes complex truths, complex ideas down to a level that children can engage with. I've seen you do it in the children's messages and things like that. Talk to us about how you think through that, what that process looks like, and maybe what tips you could give us.
Yeah, a lot of times there are some, like you said, some complex ideas that are important to our faith life, but it's hard to get that down to a child level. And so I always try to start with a simple visual. So a lot of times in our children's message, we'll use an object lesson that we can connect either to a Bible passage or the main point of our message. Children really connect well with visualizing and being able to see something tangible that they can make a connection with. And so if we're talking about something and we have an object up front that we're able to show and use and let the kids share about, they start to make those connections. So then when we move from a concrete example into a not so concrete example, they're still able to make those connections. So that's, I'd say, is the first thing, is try to find something that you can use as a visual. So whether that is an object lesson or even a video or a children's Bible, something like that, that will be a good connection point for our kids. That's usually the first place that I start with.
Awesome. And so, and again, I've seen you do this really well in the children's message. You have a message you want to communicate, and then you find an object or something concrete that goes along with it. What if I'm just sort of spending time with my child or my grandchild? How can I start to have eyes to I didn't practice these questions ahead of time, but this one just came to me.
Yeah.
How do I start to connect kind of everyday objects, everyday events, things that we come across in the world? How could I start to connect those with Jesus, or use those as opportunities to talk about Jesus?
Yeah, I think it's really important for you yourself to be grounded in the word, to be able to already have that base knowledge that you're able to share. So the more time that you're spending in God's word, whether that's in a devotion or a Bible study or in church, that you're able to then have a better understanding to then teach to somebody else. If I, as a parent, don't even know what the Bible story is myself, how am I able to teach that to somebody else, if that makes
Yeah, fair
sense?
enough. Yeah, we say
Um,
a lot here that the more you spend time in the Word, watching what Jesus does, the more you'll know how he can
exactly.
act in the world.
Right. And the more that you can emulate what Jesus did in his teachings as well. So that is super important and really is the foundation for where to go next with kids. I think that giving kids the opportunity to ask questions is really good too. So just having open conversations with your kids or your grandkids is a great way to start those faith conversations that we've been talking about a little bit. There's lots of great resources out there to kind of equip you to start those. I have a few that I've written that we can share about later, but just finding time to spend with your child or your grandchild one-on-one to start that relationship and make that really a solid foundation as you move into faith sharing.
Absolutely. What's the kind of age range that you work with?
So here at Cornerstone, I work with 0 to 4th grade.
Okay.
And so getting them from our Parents and Twos class into our Sunday school program, into our Vacation Bible School age. So anything in that elementary and lower area. At my previous church, I worked up to 6th grade. And so we did some pre-confirmation stuff with our preteens and worked in a school setting as well.
Nice. So in that range, whether you want to do the 4th grade range or the 6th grade range, what are some common faith questions that kids of that age are asking, or what are the faith concerns that they're wrestling with that maybe parents or grandparents could be on the lookout for?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll start off with our younger kids, our littles, our preschool age. They're just really looking for who is Jesus. They start hearing these stories and they want to know, oh, who is this person? What did he do? That general base knowledge where we're able to clearly express the gospel to them of Jesus as our savior, and having them have that solid foundation of Jesus is our savior. He died on the cross for you because he loves you, is really what they're looking for. Just that real simple one sentence gospel explanation, if you want to call it that. Moving up then as they get older, especially as kids get into those upper grades and they start to experience things in their own lives that are challenging, they might start to ask questions of like, how do I know that God is working? How can I share him with my friends at school? That's when we really get to start diving deeper into a lot of Old Testament stories with our kids, because they've got that base knowledge of who Jesus is. And we can then be like, let's look back and see how all of this in the Bible points to Jesus.
Yeah. I like that. I'm just taking a few notes as you talk. So the question you brought out, how do I know that Jesus is real, that he's working?
Mm-hmm.
How would you begin to answer that question or share? So that's a great opportunity to share some good news with a child, right?
Yeah.
How would you begin to answer that question for them?
Yeah. So we in our Sunday school time, for example, in our large group time, we've got where we introduce our Bible story, and then we have a brief life application section of like, what does this mean to me? So how are we taking that Bible point from the story and relating it to our own lives?
Can you give us an example of one that you've done recently?
Yeah. So for example, in this last week in our Sunday school classes, we shared the story of Jesus calling the disciples and how he called them to follow him. And so our main point was all about, I can follow Jesus. And so when we get to our life application stages, we talk about, what does that look like? What does following Jesus look like? So we give students an opportunity to share about times that they have been able to follow Jesus, whether that is in coming to church, in having conversations in their households, in things even small of like, what does it mean to show Jesus's love? Well, I know that when I'm kind to my friends at school, that's how I can show Jesus's love. When I help a friend with their homework, that's how I can show Jesus's love in my third grade context.
Sure. So that's another example then of kind of making things concrete for them. Great.
Right, being able to let them share about their experiences, because we know that kids have all different kinds of experiences based on their families and their schools and just the different struggles that even young kids go through. And so by creating an environment where they're able to share things that they have gone through, a lot of times it'll help other kids make those connections as well.
Yeah. And I think what you're just showing us too is a pattern that even parents or grandparents could follow around the dinner table, or maybe a bedtime routine to get the kids talking, to start the conversation about what faith looks like in our lives.
Right.
I like that a lot. Anything else you want to share around this idea of how to share faith with children before we kind of shift gears a little bit?
I would just say that I really like that example you brought up about sharing around the dinner table. That is something that I did in my family growing up and had really created a good foundation for me growing up to be able to be comfortable with my faith and comfortable talking about my faith, and then comfortable to take my faith a step further and make it my own instead of just something my parents or my grandparents would talk to me about. It was now something that I knew was for me. And I was able to kind of take it on a personal level, if that makes sense.
That's really great. Was there a particular pattern that your family used or a structure?
So usually anytime that we would be around the dinner table, we would have a conversation about even something simple of like, where did you see God today? And it might be something like, oh, well, I really loved being outside at recess, and talking about how God is in creation, and something simple like that is seeing God at work. Or I was really struggling with something at school today, and so I said a prayer and I knew that God would hear me. Just the simple stuff like that. And when parents are open to sharing their faith and the kids are able to see that this is something my parents are also doing with me, it makes it easier for our kids to be open and share as well.
Yeah, I think that's key. I'm going to repeat that because I thought it was so good. When parents are open to sharing their faith, it helps the kids see that this is something that and I'm going to shift gears a little bit, that this is something we do as a family, right? That's kind of where I want to go with the next piece of our conversation is, so far you've done a really good job of telling us how to speak faith to children, how to share faith with children. But again, one of the things we talk about quite a bit on our podcast here is how to share our faith. And we tend to think about that and talk about it, and because everybody that does this is adults, we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about how adults can share their faith with adults. But if we wanted that, as you kind of said in your family, that was talking about our faith, talking about how faith impacts us, how we saw it at work throughout the day, that was a part of your family's routine, which I think is awesome. If we wanted to involve our children in sharing faith, how might we do that?
I want to point to a really good resource that I just read recently that I think would be really good for parents and grandparents. It's a book called Family Discipleship by Matt Chandler. And he talks about creating those faith routines as a part of your everyday life. So he talks a lot about just those simple things of like around the dinner table, or when you're in the car on the way to a soccer practice, how you're able to kind of start in your already routine that you have as a family, how you're able to start implementing those kind of faith conversations. So I would really encourage families to look into that. I read it as somebody that doesn't have kids, and I still was able to say this would be some really good and easy things to start at a base level with a family that just wants to start those faith conversations.
Is there anything in particular that stuck out to you that you want to share with us?
So in that book, it provides kind of like a table for scheduling your routine. So you can put your routine in this book of like, on this day we have to do this, and we always say bedtime prayers together, and figure out how in your structured routine you already have, where are those easy places that you can start those conversations. And so it's not like, oh, I have to add something new to my schedule. I have to add this big thing to our lives that are already super busy. It's finding those kind of organic moments where you can share the gospel with your kids.
Sure. And so if I'm a part of a busy family who doesn't have time always to have dinner together, what are some suggestions either that you found in this book or that you might add for where those moments might crop up or where I could be on the lookout for them?
I think the biggest opportunity, and what I try to tell families now, especially it's insane how crazy busy families are between kids activities and parent activities. So we find that the time that you spend with your kids the most is in the car, whether you are driving to school, picking up from school, going to soccer practices or music lessons or whatever it might be. We spend the most of times with our kids in the car. And that's a time when you are in a confined space together. And so it's really easy to start those conversations in that time. So it might be
only have time, right?
Right. It might be the only time, right? The only time that you guys are all together with really no distractions because we're in the car. And so even being able to say a prayer together as you're driving. I know a lot of people that when they see like an emergency vehicle, they'll take time with their families to pray for that situation. Or when we're at a stoplight, we're going to take the stoplight time to say a 1-minute prayer for whatever. So those kinds of situations that come up organically when you're in a car are a great opportunity to start those small action steps. You want to call them that?
Absolutely. And I would maybe add one more suggestion. I love the idea of, what are we praying for as we are in the car? Or even you mentioned bedtime prayers earlier. One straightforward kind of mindset shift might be as you're in the car and you're saying your prayers and you're praying about your family things and the needs that your child is feeling, and those are all great. But maybe consider adding who's a friend that needs prayer. And that's a way of helping our kids start to look outward with their faith. What are my friends struggling with? What are my friends going through? And then you can add the question too, well, what are they, especially with older kids, what do you think they're feeling? All right. So my friend Joey got a low test score. He didn't do well on his test, or somebody was mean to him in school today. Well, what do you think he's feeling? And you can help, and you could probably do better than I could of helping walk a child through what that might feel like.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great example.
And then here's the question we sort of ask adults, but it can work here too. What would Jesus say to a person feeling that? What do you think Jesus would say? So again, just a quick process of who's a friend or some of a classmate, somebody that needs some prayer, and what do they need prayer for? What would Jesus say to that is a way to help our kids even start to orient their faith outward as well.
Yeah, I love that question of like, what would Jesus say? Because that's the way that kids are able to make those connections. They're reading these Bible stories when they come to church, they're hearing those things. And so for them to then take their knowledge and say, okay, let's take it one step further. What would Jesus say to my friend? Or how can I be like Jesus?
Yeah, same thing. What could, and you mentioned this earlier, what could I do that might show them some of Jesus' love? Well, I could be kind to them. I could encourage them, whatever it might be. And it doesn't necessarily matter if they go and do that thing just yet. At this point, it's about, are they thinking along those lines of how do I be outward focused with my faith?
Yeah, definitely.
That's really great. I had another question and I lost it. Something you said that piqued my interest. What resources does Cornerstone have to offer for families who say we maybe want more intentionality around our what faith looks like in our week? What does Cornerstone have out there that would be able to support that?
I'd say the biggest resource is just talking to our staff. We have an incredible staff here of all different talents. And so if you have questions about how you can do this in your family, or you want more, talk to one of our pastors, talk to myself or Trisha Statler, our other children's ministry director. And we would love to help you have those conversations in your home to get you the right resources or just some good ideas on what you can do with your family that are those easy steps like we have talked about today. We've got lots of awesome opportunities for families to come together to our events. So I know that I'm relatively new here, but just in the past couple of months, we've had some great family events surrounding the Christmas season. And so being able to come to those events together as a family to take time out of your schedule. And that's really
to invite other families as well.
Yeah. And that's showing your kids, this is something that's important in our family, that we're setting our time to do something together as a family, first of all, but together as a family around Jesus. And like you said, yeah, a great opportunity to invite your other friends, your friends from school or in your neighborhood.
Absolutely. What's one small step that if a parent or a grandparent who's listening and they say, I want to try this out. I want to dip my toe in the water. I want to start this journey of bringing more faith conversation into our week. What's one easy first step that they might take?
I think a great first step would just be I'm trying to figure out the right word, not intentional, but to just start praying with your kids. Sometimes I find a lot of adults can be uncomfortable praying because they feel like they have to say the right thing or say it a certain way. And so when we're just able to take time with our kids to say a prayer, to thank God, to ask him for help with what we're going through, even to say, God, help our family take this next step to be more intentional in our faith. Mm-hmm. Something like that to then start you on the track of, all right, I'm in a different mindset now of the importance of this for my family. And then we can get into those next steps that we've talked about, reading Bible stories at home, singing Bible songs at home,
asking those questions around the table or in the car.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I agree with you. Lots of people are uncomfortable praying because they think they have to use fancy words and clever turns of phrase. Mm-hmm. The way that sometimes pastors do. Pastors should not pray that way either, always. But let me encourage you, if you heard Becca say that and you said, I'm not a good prayer, let me encourage you with this. You don't have to use fancy words, especially when you're praying with kids. Use kid language, right? Because kids don't always understand fancy words anyway.
Yeah.
So if you use simple language, not only is it easier for you, but it actually connects with your audience, so to speak. It actually connects with the kids better too. So that's a win-win, and it's an easier job.
Exactly.
I think that's great. I want to say this also, if you're listening to us or you're watching this and you're not a Cornerstone disciple, maybe you're part of another congregation or maybe not, but we still really want to support you. If you are a Cornerstone disciple, you know how to contact Becca. If not, you can visit us at cornerstonelutheran.church and you can find ways to get connected that way. We would still love to resource you, support you in that journey. cornerstonelutheran.church is our website. That's where you'll find us. And I'll say this too. I asked the question earlier, but start small really is okay. This is such an important topic, and Becca, I'm really happy to have you because what you're sharing with us, I think, is what so many people want. We all want our families to be strong. We all want, and this is, I'm sure, a question you hear all the time of, how can I help my kids have strong faith as they get older, as they go out into the world? Mm-hmm. Here's the analogy that I always use. When I really like something, think about a restaurant that you really, really like. What do you go out and do?
My favorite restaurant is Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A. Okay. So
I love it.
There you go. Awesome. I'm a big Chick-fil-A fan. We don't have one around me, so I don't eat it that much, but it does taste good. So when I find, maybe for you it's Chick-fil-A, when I find a restaurant maybe that's new or I've not tried before and I really like it, the first thing, or a movie that I'm really excited about, the first thing that I do is go and tell everybody I can about it. You got to see this movie. You got to see this movie. Or, for me, it's like tech products and gadgets, and I love to talk about how great all my gadgets are and how they're going to improve your life and why you absolutely need one. And the more that I do that, the more convinced I am that the thing is awesome, right?
Yeah.
And so in the same way, talking about our faith, sharing our faith with others can help strengthen it. Because when you do that, you're also talking to yourself why this is valuable to me, why it matters. So the more that you, with your kids, talk about it and encourage them to talk about it and help them share it with other people, that's how you can start to build that strong faith that you want in them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always say something is better than nothing.
Absolutely.
So if it's one small thing that you're doing, that is better than not talking to your kids about faith at all.
That was
So
going
I
to
would-
be my closing point too.
Yeah. So I
Start
just want to
small.
encourage people again to just do those small things like we've shared about here. It doesn't have to be anything big or extravagant or something that you plan for, but just find those small moments that you're able to talk with your kids and share the love of Jesus with them.
Absolutely. And they will listen. I'm the same way. I grew up in a church. I can tell you they'll listen.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Becca. It's great to have you with us, and thanks for what you're doing for our children and for sharing with us today how we can help that relationship grow as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved being here.
Yeah, you'll have to come back sometime.
Yes, for sure.
And for those listening, we will see you again next week. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us for the Pack the House show. For more content like this, or to connect with us, visit our website, cornerstonelutheran.church.